Hey, it's Diana from An Ageless Life, and today I want to talk about something that actually came up because of a couple of conversations that I've had with different clients, and that is what can you do to prevent Alzheimer's and dementia? And in these two individuals in particular, they were taking care of their parents and was really a lot of, "Oh my god, I don't want my children to have to go through this." In one situation, her mother is actually living with her, and it's quite difficult to say the least, as far as the care that's needed, the transitions that are needed. Sometimes things don't go exactly, or I should say, many times they don't go exactly as you would want them to, and it's frustrating for the person who has either Alzheimer's or dementia. So let's back up a little bit and talk about some of the things that manifest earlier. In other words, the studies, I should say that before you get Alzheimer's or dementia, things actually happen like 2 to 3 decades earlier. And examples of what kinds of things can be going on are feeling depressed, decreased memory, decreased drive for intimacy, and your brain kind of tricking you, thinking you're really craving sugar, wanting sugar a lot. And these are all associated with an imbalance in the brain with how it deals with sugar. So, some of these diseases, for example, Alzheimer, is now being called the the third type of diabetes. So it's a diabetes that affects how your brain uses sugar. And sugar is the engine that drives our ability to think and our ability to remember things. It helps get rid of toxins for the rest of the body and those kinds of things. So it's really important that we start looking at that now. And like I mentioned, some of the telltale signs to look for now are are you depressed? Do you have a hard time remembering things? And some of these can be associated with hormonal changes and those kinds of things. But sugar is a pretty easy one to watch out to see if you have too much of it. And some of the other things are, no longer having a sex drive or very suppressed sex drive. Um, and then thinking that you need to eat more than what you are. And I'll go into a little bit of the mechanics associated with these because I think it's important to understand what sugar really does to your brain. I mean, we all know that sugar can cause weight gain. Typically, the weight gain is around the middle, not something that, especially as well, women or men want, because we know, number one, that weight gain around the middle is a sign of, a potential to develop diabetes. They generally have higher incidence of heart attacks, all of those kinds of things that are really not healthy outcomes and don't bode well for longevity. So, we want to live well until the day that we die. Right? That's kind of the whole thing with longevity. It's quality of life as well as having a longer life. So, some of the risk associated with having too much sugar in your diet are, like I mentioned, increased incidence of dementia and Alzheimer's. The actually blood vessels in the brain are weakened or don't work as well, and that causes the brain to shrink. And when the brain shrinks, that means we can't think as well. We don't have a very good memory, um, and all part of this kind of downward decline that can happen. Um, it can also make you more prone to strokes because when those blood vessels aren't working the way that they should, you can think of it as kind of like a hose that when the hose gets to the point where it's really brittle or shrinking, has more of a tendency to break or things can kind of burst through. And that's what happens to your brain. And strokes are, to say the least, ugly. Lots of physical therapy. Sometimes you make it, sometimes you don't. You a lot of times don't ever regain full function. It's a lot of work. Having worked with people that have had strokes before, I can tell you it's a very painful process for them and very frustrating, and takes a lot of work. So one of the things that you can do is to start look at, and I always say, first assess. In other words, take a look at where you are and what you're doing. So begin by looking at, where do I have sugar? Or when do I have sugar? How much sugar do I have? So places to kind of start looking at that is, do I drink sugary drinks? Do I go to my favorite coffee place and order, caramel macchiato with a shot of um, something else in it? Because all of those contain sugar or high fructose corn syrup. And your body kind of treats them the same way, but there's a whole set of issues that are even more frightening associated with doing the artificial sugars. And by that means, it means high fructose corn syrup. It can mean aspartame, any of those kinds of things. All of those change our gut, which also changes our brain and our body and everything else. So start again, simplify the process, is to say, where am I taking in sugar and how often? Because really dropping that down. And so for women, the requirements or the amount of sugar that we can have per day is much lower. And when I say sugar, I'm talking added sugar, but also in this case, fruit juices, because fruit juice, especially like orange or grapefruit, have a ton of sugar in them. And they've got nothing in them that really slows down how your body reacts to the sugar. So, again, step one, analyze what you're taking in and looking at opportunities that you can maybe switch out something, or you can maybe have less of it. Stevia is a great option as far as sugars are concerned and doesn't do the same stuff to the brain or to the body that the other sugars do. Stevia is actually an herb. So that's one option. And then make a plan. So you realize that you put tons of syrup on your pancakes in the morning, maybe switch it out. And one of the key things that you can do is make sure you have enough healthy fats and protein. And breakfast is a great place to start, because when you start out the morning with those, then your body gets kind of fueled up and says, yeah, I got what I need. I don't need to crave all this other stuff. If you start with a high carb breakfast, you'll eat as much as 25 to 50% more calories throughout the day than if you start with a breakfast that's rich in protein or fats. I say breakfast, but I really mean the first meal of the day, because that sets up how your body is going to react from there. So you've looked at where the sugar is. Now let's start looking at how you decrease. So we've talked about healthy fats and protein, especially for the first meal of the day. We've talked about decreasing juice. One of the tips that I recommend for people is, if you really, really like juice, mix it 50-50 with water. It's not going to taste the same, but it still gives a little bit of fun flavor, interesting taste to the water that you're drinking. And as a bonus, you're getting hydration, which also plumps up your skin and makes it look great. The other thing that you can look at is, when you eat a meal, do you eat enough? Because if you eat a little bit and then you start to get hungry, or in mid-afternoon or so, you're like, I need something. The quickest thing for most of us to reach for is something that is easily converted to sugar. And those are things like candy, or it can be like chips or crackers or cookies or any of those kinds of things. And your body's going to treat them, because it's converted like immediately into sugar pretty much the same way. So eating a healthy meal in a good sized portion, enough that can take you through until your next meal. Having sugar creates a sugar burnout effect. So, and we've all seen this with kids, right? You have a kid, and I used to see this with my daughter when I take her to a birthday party. Afterwards, she would come home and she would be like, "Zoo, zoo, 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 zoo," and then crabby, grouchy, nasty, boom, crash. Well, it's the same thing for us as adults as well. We don't probably have the same level of extremes, although I have seen people that have gone to the extreme crabbies. Basically, brain's had a lot of sugar, it's fired a lot. Now it doesn't have any, it goes into a depression, hangry, whatever mode it is as far as that's concerned. So we really want to kind of stay away from that piece of it. Um, as far as other things that you can do, fruit is going to be a better source of the natural sugars than eating any artificial sugars or white sugar. But again, there's a caveat in that you don't want to just live on fruit. Some fruits are more easily and more quickly converted to sugar. I talked about orange juice, and actually, diabetics use orange juice when they have really low blood sugar, when it bottoms out, to bring their sugar up fairly quickly. So, orange juice, grapes, those kinds of things. But looking at why it's important now, and from an issue of dementia, also from Alzheimer's. But lastly, it really ages your body. It's the inflammation that it's caused throughout the body, causes the weight gain around the middle, the puffiness in the face, all of those kinds of things. And you can think of it as kind of like that commercial. And it was in the late 80s and played all the way up until about the mid 2010s. And that was, this is your brain. And it shows an egg frying right. And then this is your, or an egg. And it says, this is your brain on drugs. And they crack the eggs and you see it cooking in the pan. That's kind of what happens with sugar, is that your body just gets all haywire. And then it gets to a point where it can't use the sugar. And that's why, in particular, Alzheimer is called the third kind of diabetes. So, tips to leave you with: eat good food for breakfast, protein and good fats, cut back on the sugar because that will have and start now so that in 15, 20, 30 years, you don't end up with dementia or Alzheimer's. That's it for today. Remember, I have supplement Saturdays. And so this Saturday, we are going to talk about NMN. That's a supplement that was requested a couple of months ago, and it's time for it to be up in the queue. So I'll see you then. Bye bye.